Welcome to another episode of Living with Purpose. I have a wonderful individual, Vivek Bhaskaran, who is the founder and CEO of QuestionPro and a serial entrepreneur. I mean, he's kind of been doing all sorts of crazy stuff here and there throughout his journey. But I find him to be really fascinating because he just loves motorcycling. And he kind of goes off on these tangents, and every place he goes, he kind of goes and rides and finds these interesting places. And part of what drives him is this purpose to actually show up in an effective way, not only in the business community, but also for himself, and in doing so, motivating others to find themselves in things that they pursue and commit to. So please join me in welcoming Vivek Bhaskaran. Vivek, welcome.
Thank you, Arthur. Great to be here.
Talk a little bit about yourself. I mean, I want you to start off from your growing up and then the tech journey and then why running around the world. Like you said, you travel all the time and you've got offices all over the world. And by the way, QuestionPro is a competitor to Qualtrics. It's the only other company that provides business survey opportunities. So if you're really looking for a great survey company, please go look at QuestionPro.
Thank you, Arthur. I grew up in India until high school. After high school, I really wanted to do computer science, computer engineering. That was back in the mid-90s. And I had my dad somehow figured out to bring home a computer. So his office, his work in India had given him a computer. And he's like, I'm not going to use this computer, so let me just take it back home and my son can probably use it. I was kind of like, hacking away in BASIC and everything else. And that got me kind of super, I guess, addicted to computers. And I used to assemble computers and all that stuff. But after high school in India, I couldn't actually get into any of the IITs. So in order to do computer science in India back then, you had to be in the top 0.1% of all people. I couldn't get into IITs. So I was super depressed. And I said, fuck it, I'm going to leave India. I left for Russia, actually, so I couldn't get into any of the ideas. So I left for Russia, stayed there for about 2 years, and I was like, okay, that's a bad idea. Also, so I was like, what?
But now in Russia too, you were hustling, right? So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I landed in Russia, and I was like, it's a tough life in Russia as in Moscow. So I had to make money. I mean, like, my parents could afford the tuition, but living in Moscow also obviously required cash. And there I started assembling computers and selling them. That was my very first business that I started, was assembling computers, selling them. I also sold cigarettes, believe it or not. I used to buy in bulk and sell it in retail inside the dorm rooms. So that was another way of making money. And then eventually the other business that I started when I was in Russia, it was just, you guys love this. It was just the beginning of the internet. So most people in Russia at the time, most Indians in Russia could not get any information, like as in news. So now it seems kind of crazy, but this was the mid-90s. So I developed a little software program. I would create a newsletter. I would go online and find all the news about India the previous day, create a one-page newsletter and fax it to all the Indian traders that were there in Moscow. So I had a subscription service, actually, believe it or not. It was like I think it was $1 per week or something like that. That was what I was charging, so $5 a month. So I would fax a newsletter every day, and I developed this program that would obviously, fax it, but you would give it 100 phone numbers, or just kind of one after the other all night. It would fax everything. So those are my kind of initial forays into business, I guess. Quite frankly, it was largely driven by, the need for survival. I mean, you need cash for survival. And that's what I think it is relevant even today, because those experiences kind of gave me the foundation of like, look, nothing is impossible. So that's kind of my core philosophy is nothing is impossible. You can do whatever you want. So that instilled, and you could argue, I was pretty impressionable at the time. I was 18, 19, 20 at the time. And I was like, okay, whatever I want to do, I can do. And then I ended up transferring from Russia to the US. A Mormon school, Brigham Young University in Utah. So there was a pretty stark difference between Moscow and BYU. And one of the big reasons I transferred to BYU, partly was obviously it was relatively inexpensive. And also they accepted a bunch of my transfer credits. So international transfer credits is not easy. Transfer credits within the States is pretty easy, but if you've done like the freshman year somewhere else in some other college outside the States and then transferring it really is up to the school to determine how much transfer credits they want to give you. So they gave me, I think, the most amount of transfer credits. So I was pretty jazzed about it, and that's how I landed in the States. Finished off my undergrad there, then landed up in Seattle actually. So got a job in the Seattle during the dot-com boom, and then in 2003, 2005 is when I quit my day job in Seattle and I started QuestionPro at the time. And then, frankly, I've been, funding startups or being part of startups or kind of running QuestionPro since then for my entire life since then.
So let's just go back a little bit. So where did you grow up in India?
I'm a Tamilian, which is from the southern part of India, but I grew up in a place called Calcutta, which is on the western part of India. So yeah, so I speak Bengali actually pretty well because I grew up there. So I from second grade to I guess high school, I was there in Calcutta, and so. But my Tamil is pretty shitty because my Tamil is the only Tamil that I speak is what with my mom and dad. That's about it. So I don't have colloquial Tamil.
And your dad was working in a company there.
Correct. He was working for the coal mining company there. So he was an exec at the coal mining company in India. So and they were headquartered in Calcutta actually. So the Coal India is headquartered in Calcutta. So that's where he used to work.
And how was your childhood? Just any nuggets about, growing up? And then also siblings, etc. What was the environment that actually got you? Yeah, I understand that you got a computer at home, so that fascinated you. But even earlier on, you must have been tinkering with things.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've always been kind of like doing kind of, like tinkering is probably the best way to describe it. So I even built these electronic kits. So you could buy these electronic circuit boards, solder them, and create timers and LED display units and things like that. So I've always been sort of fascinated by DIY doing things. And on the computer side, it was just like more software programming, but on the other side, it was more like hardware. Well, not really hardware, but electronics, I would probably say is the right word. So for example, so in India, the pressure system, the water pressure is pretty low typically. The municipality doesn't, I guess, put enough pressure on the water. So usually what happens in India is like you have these, they're called sumps. You put the water in a holding tank and then pump the water up to the top of the house so that the water pressure is uniform for your showers and everything else. So the challenge with that process is that the amount of time it takes to pump the water, it's got to be a fixed timer. So my dad used to turn the pump on and forget to turn off the pump, and the water used to overflow on the top. It was a big mess, and the water's everywhere. So I designed a little timer for the water pump so that he turns it on, and effectively after about 15 minutes, it turns off by itself. Seems kind of pretty normal nowadays, but back in the day, having having an electronic timer for your water pump was, I guess, not. You had to put a relay in and all that stuff because the water pump was a 220 volt. Blah, 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 all that stuff. So, but anyway, so that was one of my projects. It was, and dad really loved it. He's like, oh, okay, at least there's not water everywhere. So anyway, so that was a fun project. So those are the kind of projects I used to tinker with quite a bit. So that naturally kind of yields itself to kind of love doing things by hand. Even today, I try to, obviously talked a little about motorcycles. I love fixing my own motorcycles and working on them. Motorcycles are easy. Cars are really difficult. They're like big and heavy, but motorcycles are pretty small. So you can actually, in a garage, you can fix the motorcycle. You can replace the chain, do whatever you want. So I really like doing things with my hand. Not a painter like we just talked. I mean, not that you're really good at art. I definitely am not good at art, but I like to kind of like work on things. That gives me a lot of joy. Just the sense of building something and seeing it work. Obviously, it's pretty satisfying, at least for me.
So, motorcycles, when did you start riding? And then how did that become your passion, your love that gives you joy? You just talked about how working with motorcycles gives you joy, tinkering gives you joy. So, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, I've always been fascinated by motorcycles because of the speed. As a kid, you see the motorcycle in, GP, you see everything. So, it's kind of like a fascination of sorts, the speed and the mechanics. But also, I also feel motorcycles like you're immersed. Unlike a car, you're using all four. Literally, when you ride a motorcycle, you're using all four. Both your hands, both your legs. Really, brakes, gear, clutch, front brakes. So you're kind of like fully immersed in the experience. Number one, I got into motorcycles when I was in college. Actually, at BYU. Honestly, it's a cheap transportation model. frankly, like you could buy a motorcycle for $1,000, quite frankly, or maybe 1 or 2 grand. You could buy a reasonably good motorcycle and you can rip around for at least half the year at BYU, or maybe 30% of the time. In winter, it gets really cold, and so obviously you can't ride a motorcycle. But during the summer, it's like a cheap and dirty transportation model. But then I got really into it over the years. But I had to stop also when my kids were born. I had 2 motorcycles in Seattle. Actually, I had 2 motorcycles in Seattle when my daughter, she's 17 right now. So obviously 17 years ago, when my daughter was coming online, my wife was like, look, man, you're gonna kill yourself and stop this. We got kids and, we need to stop this. So I made a deal with her. Of course, I like making deals. So I made a deal with her. Okay. You know, hey, look, you know what? I'll sell both the motorcycles, but you gotta let me rent motorcycles. So I'll rent a motorcycle and ride it whenever I'm somewhere. So at least, so she's like, okay, fine, that's a fair compromise. I don't, so I sold the motorcycles then in my garage. And then, but whenever I travel, I used to rent motorcycles. So that's when I started this whole notion of, I travel quite a bit. And what happened was, I traveled quite a bit internationally and for work. And then I used to go do all the work and do the meetings and, internal, external, and then come back. So it was not really fulfilling anything outside of work when you travel for work. I actually got this from a friend of mine. He's like, dude, just rent a motorcycle wherever you are and, take a couple of days off. If you're going somewhere for, 3 days, take an extra 2 days off and rent a motorcycle and explore that place. That's how I got into this idea. I was like, look, whenever I travel for work now, I'll take a couple of days off and then explore it. And exploring any new place in a motorcycle, again, it's very experiential, right? If you think about it, right? It's like you feel the heat, you smell completely different, right? Just like, if you notice, you can bike around the same area like a bicycle, you'll completely experience that same area completely differently than you take a car and you just drive around, right? So I think the experience of the motorcycle, obviously, I feel part of it. So, and it's a fun, it's interesting way of kind of assimilating in. And so that's the reason. That was one way I thought, like, look, whenever I'm traveling, I'll just, it's not that. Actually, believe it or not, in some countries, it's actually very, very difficult to rent motorcycles. All of Saudi Arabia, there's one rental shop. That's in Riyadh. That's just one company that, one guy. And he just started like about, 6 months ago. In Egypt, for example, you can't even rent a motorcycle. There's no concept of a rental of a motorcycle. So you have to rent it from some private guy and say like, okay, let me borrow, basically I'm borrowing his bike for a weekend. So it's an interesting experience. Obviously, like motorcycle, you ride in random places. So I get tremendous joy. Like I get the work done in like, let's say 3-5 days, and then I take the weekend off and then I spend it. So it expands my kind of travel a little bit, but also it fulfills me personally. I'm not just going all the way to somewhere to just work and come back, but actually have some fun also while I'm at it.
Recently you posted your ride in Saudi Arabia. You actually went to the end of the world or something. Talk a little bit about that and that day experience. What did you get out of it?
Yeah, I mean, I love kind of these adventure rides. So to give you some context, so I was in Saudi. I rented a motorcycle. It was a dual sport, so I actually could go off road. So there's a place outside of Riyadh I think it's called the Edge of the World. Literally, it's called the Edge of the World. I mean, it's not really the Edge of the World, but it's a cool place where it's basically it's a 3,000 feet drop from a plateau. So you kind of off road to this place, and then from there you can see the 3,000 feet drop across massive landscape. So I was like, oh, I can find it on Gaia, and I can find it on the Google, on Google Maps, but any off-road trailing kind of have that. So I was like, oh, let me just go there. Obviously, I rented a dual sport motorcycle, which means the motorcycle could go off road. So I went up all the way there. There were other. I think I was the only guy with the motorcycle. Everybody else had 4-wheel drives and everything else. There was a few people over there. The interesting part was kind of by the time I reached there, it was like 5 o'clock, and then I had to come back. It was like a 20-mile off-road trail. So the challenge was, it's like a destination. So there were a bunch of trails that will lead up to there, and then obviously a bunch of trails lead back. So there was nobody behind me. Like I was like, and it was getting dark. And so by the time I reached asphalt 20 miles later, I was like 8 in the evening. So it was like, I was pretty scared. The point I'm trying to make is that, I get myself into kind of shitty situations like this, but then you have to force yourself to think about making all these decisions to get yourself out of those situations. So I do get myself into a lot of dumb situations, but that is almost like I'm kind of training myself to like, yeah, you're going to get yourself into a bad situation and then you got to figure out a way and make small decisions. And I love, adventure writing. That's why a lot of people like adventure writing is because every decision you make counts in terms of whether I get stuck. If I drop the bike there at, 7 in the evening, there's nobody coming there to help me. There's no cell phone coverage. There's nothing. And it's Saudi Arabia. I don't even know what 911 equivalent of Saudi Arabia is. And I'm not sure that they'll actually give a shit about it. And you got to figure out a way to get yourself out. And that is part of the psychology. That's part of the adrenaline. That's part of the excitement is to find ways to, even when you're in a bad situation, you got to figure out, you got to keep your head cool and, keep going forward in terms of all the decisions you're making. And all the small decisions obviously matter either positively or negatively. So in terms of how you plan for things.
Fantastic. This is just another way that people get driven because they find joy in doing something. And that kind of allows you to overcome so many disadvantages or obstacles that will actually come in your way. So let's turn to your work and your business and QuestionPro. How did you start it? And now you've been on this journey for a very long time. So talk a little bit about how you started it, how you've grown. You've not taken any external funding. Well, what's that story like?
Yeah, I'll be blunt and straight. The reason everybody's got some kind of esoteric reason, but I had a pretty simple reason up there to start QuestionPro is I got sick of my day job. Dumb as it sounds, I hated my life. I got sick of my day job. I was doing consulting work in Seattle. Consulting is great. It pays a lot of money. You're the hard shot, but you don't really own anything in the consulting world, or at least in tech consulting. You don't own anything. You're working for a client and they're paying you a reasonably good amount of money. And I got really, frankly, unfulfilled. The money was actually pretty good. I didn't call anything on my own. And that's when I decided fuck it. I'm just going to go build something that I can call that's mine, that I can make the decision about what to do and what not to do. To me, that I realized something, and that was a aha moment personally, at least, was that, the freedom to do what you want to do itself has value. Most people, may or may not place value. I place a disproportionately high value on that. Look, I want to do what I want to do. That is more important than making the most amount of money or most impact. So that's how I got started with QuestionPro. And the reason I got into this, frankly, the survey and stumbled into the survey business is because when I was in school, I was approached by a market research professor. When I was in BYU, a market research professor, connected with me. He was doing, obviously, market research. He needed a software developer to build him a survey platform because back in the day, every single survey project was a kind of almost like they had to hire developers to build the survey itself. It was in the late 90s, again, when I was in college. He wanted to build a survey. At the time, he called it the survey engine. So we, at the time, had started a company called QuestionPro, which was Scott Smith. That's his name. That's the professor's name. He was a BYU and B school professor. And so he and I had started a company called QuestionPro. That didn't go anywhere. And then we had a bitter divorce in 2003, 2005. He kept QuestionPro, I kept QuestionPro. And then I kind of that was the genesis. So I knew I had built that. And then I knew I hated my day job. So I said, all right, let me just take that, kind of build a company around it. No prior experience, marketing, selling, doing anything. Obviously, I was a software developer by trade, which means I could build the software, but I had no idea how to sell it or how to market it. But I said, fuck it, we can figure that out. So I kind of started QuestionPro. And you talked a little bit about funding. I'll address that also. In the first couple of years, we actually started making quite a bit of money. And we were like, oh shit, this is not, because we got lucky, to be honest, we got lucky because we kind of invested into SEO before SEO was sexy back in the day. That led to a lot of customers coming on board. And then that led to obviously revenue. We kept our profit margins reasonably high. And so because we kept our margins high, we were like, yeah, we don't need money from anybody else. We kind of make money. So one thing led to the other. And then we never ended up raising money till we got to even $4 or $5 million. And then we said we can keep going on our own. And we've kind of since then decided not to, we've not raised money so far. Never say never, but so far we're about $35 million right now. And, we're continuing to grow.
So just quickly share a little bit about what is QuestionPro.
Absolutely. QuestionPro, it's core. It's a survey platform, very similar to Qualtrics, SurveyMonkey, Qualtrics on the top end, SurveyMonkey on the bottom end. But, by the way, backstory, that since I spent with Scott the Professor, Survey Pro, then rebranded to Qualtrics. So that's why I have this deep hatred for Qualtrics. They hate me and I hate them. So we compete against each other. So that's kind of the genesis. So that's why you'll see a lot of similarities between QuestionPro and Qualtrics because of our shared, that's how we all got started. So Ryan was Scott's son. He was CEO of Qualtrics prior to that, prior to this. So that's how Ryan was a sales guy. I was the tech guy and Scott was a professor. So that's how we all got started back in the day. So that's kind of backstory over there. But going back to QuestionPro, we are a survey platform and then for all kinds of surveys. But in the enterprise, we sell into three different use cases and three different ICPs. Number one is consumer insights and market research. So we are selling into the research and insights function of an organization, both qualitative and quantitative research, primary research. So for surveys as well as qualitative research. Number two is customer experience. So we are selling into typically reports of the chief operating officer and sometimes the CMO also, when people are trying to understand the experience of a particular product or service. We have obviously a data collection model for transactional surveys and then closed loop, outer loop, and a whole bunch of other things associated with customer experience use case. And third component for our business is employee experience. Again, surveys oriented towards employees to understand how employees think about it. So in a broad spectrum, in a nutshell, I like to say that we're in the listening business. So we can listen to the markets, to research, listen to customers, to customer experience, and listen to employees. So those are three different kind of spectrums that we target right now. And yeah, that's kind of, it's a SaaS survey platform that enables our customers to just actually listen to their constituents.
Well, this is great. Purpose is the driver. So talk a little bit about why purpose is important to you and how that has helped you both in good times and difficult times.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you and I have gotten to know each other in the last 3 or 5 years, realistically. And I mean, the reason I got super attracted to you because I've had purpose, but I've not been able to articulate it even to myself, really. Over the years, I was, yeah, you know what, I should go into philanthropy and I should do this, but it really doesn't speak to me, right? I couldn't do it. And then I start thinking about like what really drives me. Obviously, the output of the drivers is economics, but that's the final output. But there are other things that drive me. I think, obviously I credit you with kind of like helping me think about what the elements of those drivers really, right? So what really drives me and really focus on that and then really accept it. I'm afraid about focusing on it, just accepting and knowing that really, right? That itself was at least in my brain, was an unlock. I say, okay, look, you have to understand what drives you. And whatever drives you, you're probably going to be good at it because you're kind of intrinsically, you're passionate about it. So my definition of purpose is like, well, what drives you? Simple, right? So what truly drives you? And for me, a few things got unlocked after, as I thought about it, is like, things that drive me are like just, I have a massive affinity towards like, I got to do something. I'll give you an example. For a while between 2010 and 2014, I was just investing in companies and I was not actually doing anything. I was just investing in companies and I was in the board of companies and just giving advice to other companies. In fact, obviously at the same time, I invested in, a sales company in Salcedo way back when. And I realized that that's actually doesn't do anything for me. It's not, because I can't do anything, right? And if you're an angel investor in a company, you really are just kind of giving some cash and, once in a while having coffee with somebody. That's about it. You're not actually doing anything for the company. And rightly so, right? I mean, so I actually gave my life for those 4 years, although in theory, on paper, it seemed like good. It seemed like a great idea. Like, hey, I'm going to invest in a bunch of companies. They'll grow and they'll make money, da, 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 da. But since I'm not doing anything, I'm like, what the fuck am I doing every day? Just giving random advice to a bunch of random people that may or may not even care about it, quite frankly. The distillation of that was that, look, I love to do things, and that drives me. Whether that makes me the optimal money or not is a secondary question, and at this point, I would even argue it's kind of irrelevant question. So that is one of my purposes. That like I like to do things till I die. I think I'm just going to be doing something, whether it's building companies or executing on product. I get a lot of joy out of just doing things that I can see the output of within a short period of time. So that's kind of one of my purposes, is to just do things so that I can feel good about it. The other thing that I realized as part in it, it's a little bit more abstract. I realized that, I get a tremendous amount of joy out of kind of like, people who bet on me. A lot of people over the last 20 years have bet on me and I think they've made good money, frankly. And I get a tremendous amount of joy. The people who bet on me, I can secure through this process not maybe secure, but how to enhance their financial freedom, really, right? I think so. That's something that I, deeply care about. And in terms of where people are, I know that they're betting on me when they come to work at QuestionPro. Even way back when we were much smaller, they were all taking a bet, and I wanted to make sure that that bet paid off for them. They were betting on me. QuestionPro was pretty small, didn't have a brand, etc., etc. They were really betting on me as a human being. I took it upon myself. Like one of my purposes in life is Kevin, my original partner at QuestionPro, and a whole bunch of people, Rob at IdeaScale. All these guys took a bet on me. They all made money, in the process. And even as I split with them, they made money, they made cash in that process. So that's something that I have taken upon myself, and I care deeply about it. And it gives me joy. More importantly, it gives me joy that I'm able to do that. So that's my kind of, I guess I'd say that's part of my purpose in terms of just pure business.
Let's end with you just sharing your one golden nugget, a piece of wisdom that you live by that you would like to share with our listeners.
If you think about doing something, just do it. More often than not, my analysis is that we kind of like put a bunch of kind of internal parameters to say, like, hey, is this a good idea? Is this a bad idea? Like, just, my general philosophy is just fucking do it. So break through those barriers internally. It's in your own head, actually. So in your own head, like, even my kind of one piece would be, if instinctively you want to do something, just do it. And then things will pan out or not. That's fine. But at least you can go to sleep at night thinking like, hey, I got this instinct. I want to do something. You did something about it. So convert your potential to kinetic energy.
This is such a fascinating video. And I mean, one of the words that you've consistently used is joy rather than happiness. And that's another long conversation which we will do. And our listeners will actually get to know more about it because I'm writing another book called Living with Purpose. And Vivek is actually one of the co-authors. If you all are interested in learning more about the book and how to become a co-author, reach out to me. But I just want to kind of, thank Vivek for using the word joy, because in most cases, people, they use the word happiness. And I'm not a real believer in the word of happiness. I'm actually believe in the word of joy, because joy is far more collective experience, whereas happiness is a singular experience. So again, Vivek, thank you very much for being part of the Living with Purpose podcast. Purpose is that renewable source of energy that continues to drive humanity forward. Invest on it. Like the Nike slogan, just do it. If you think about it, go do it. Vivek, thank you very much for being part of this. And if you all are interested in the book, Living with Purpose, reach out to me. Thanks, Vivek. Take care.
Thank you, Octa.